Inaugural Summit on the transformation of the national system of innovation. Quite a mouthful. Currently underway, it's in Boksburg, not in Cape Town. It facilitates stakeholders, including science councillors, higher education institution officials and government. Speaking now is the Minister of Higher Education, that's Blade Nzimande. Let's listen in.
Business who are here, leaders of organized labor, distinguished guest speakers, academics and researchers, students and our youth formations who are represented here, esteemed guests, good morning. Let me start by expressing my gratitude to all of you for attending this important and historic inaugural summit on the transformation of our country's national system of innovation. I really do appreciate the fact that all of you are here. I might not have mentioned you by name, but I really do and honestly appreciate this. I also see Mr. Andy Lengaba, who is the former DG of the Department of Communications. In a matter of weeks after I was appointed as Minister of Science in the previous administration, he came to me and said, I've just come to you to talk about one thing and one thing only. Apart from congratulating you for being Minister of Science, you must know that if you don't prioritize artificial intelligence, we are all in trouble as a country. I've taken that mandate very seriously, and what I'm doing today, though it's not just on AI, but it's part of pulling together this community to say what are our priorities and how do we position our national system of innovation to grow and develop our country. And you were right, because also the simplest way I define science is that the purpose of science is to seek solutions to all the problems facing humanity. And of course, with artificial intelligence, I was attending the World Government Summit in Dubai. The minister who was the main host of that event said something very interesting, perhaps which underlines your point, Andy, that the changes that are going to happen over the next 25 years, technologically, are going to be 10 times, if not 20 times more of technological developments in the last 25 years. And in fact said, some of the things that are going to take place are likely to even overtake the whole of humanity's inventions and technological developments. Let me also put a special word of welcome to those who are joining us remotely and from other parts of the world. We are hosting this inaugural summit during a very exciting but also challenging time for us as a country, when South Africa is the G20 president, against the backdrop of major shifts and tension points in the global economic and technological environment. Colleagues, we are meeting at a time when the world is being battered by a series of convergent crises of neoliberal economic globalization, ecological sustainability, and social reproduction of inequalities, which all of these collectively and cumulatively registers all the hallmark of a generalized global planetary crisis, what the Secretary General of the United Nations has called a polycrisis. The roots of the crisis are to be found in the destructive impact of dominant forms of economic growth on Earth's life-supporting systems, which are being pushed to a set of critical tipping points. Runaway global warming, destruction of whole ecosystems, loss of biodiversity, acidification of world's oceans, I'm sure also the Gauteng Ocean is already acidified. That's why we don't see it. And unprecedented levels of global social inequality. These are the realities we've got to face, because that's where we are. Whilst we accept that natural factors drive climate change, the human impact on our planet's future sustainability is also an undeniable reality. At the same time, major advances in science and technology have been transforming many aspects of the global economy and bringing with it huge disruptions in labor markets, production and consumption of goods and services across entire economies. An example being the fourth industrial revolution, which is characterized by the blurring of boundaries between the physical, biological, and digital worlds, and infusing technologies such as artificial intelligence, which I've spoken about briefly, automation, robotics, blockchain, and machine deep learning tools into the process of capital accumulation and surplus extraction. Whilst no section of society will be left unscathed, the worst effects of these disruptive changes are being felt, unfortunately, more acutely by the most marginalized section of society, particularly the working classes and the poor of the global south. It is often argued that technology is a great equalizer that allows us to leapfrog from poverty, and the digital world is a new democracy. None of these claims by themselves are necessarily true in themselves. Why do I say this? My view is that technologies are extensions of social relations in societies and can only be properly understood in the context of such relations. There is therefore nothing inherently democratic or equalizing about any technology. For it to serve such ends, technology, we must consciously and deliberately direct and steer these instruments to drive social justice, equal and inclusive outcomes. Similarly, we must bear in mind that almost all technologies have dual use purposes. They can be harnessed to perpetuate relations of exploitation, neo-colonialism and imperialism, as some of us normally say, as was the case in our recent past, or they can be used as instruments of social emancipation, which is what I hope we will focus on in this summit, amongst other things. It is for this reason that the early 21st century has sharpened a central paradox in human history. At a time of great scientific and technological breakthroughs, we are also witnessing the highest level of social inequalities on a global scale, including a live, real-time genocide in Gaza that is AI facilitated. How could this be? That we have got this. It's a contradiction in many instances. Massive, positive technological advances, but at the same time, some of these things, in fact, what is happening in Gaza, as far as I'm concerned, can only be described as barbarism. In this connection, Angel Gurria argued that many people, and I quote, feel left behind, excluded, and treated as unimportant. Many people live precarious lives or have already fallen through the cracks of society into poverty and unemployment. They feel at the mercy of big impersonal forces of globalization, technological change, large corporations, and financial institutions. Public trust towards STI is important to the responsible development of advanced and emerging technologies, as illustrated by ongoing discussions around gene drive or artificial intelligence, AI, unquote. By the way, another big struggle that we face today is to create governments and governance that is based on science and scientific observations and not common sense. And not common sense. Today we are hearing something new, that you can run a country like the United States through common sense. Now, given these growing levels of social anxiety, in 2023, the United Nations adopted an important resolution proclaiming the period 2024 to 2033 as the International Decade of Sciences for Sustainable Development, and directed UNESCO, its primary organ responsible for science, amongst other things, to play a leading role in promoting scientific literacy, open and basic sciences, human rights, and harnessing the power of national systems of innovation to better serve society. We couldn't have held then this summit at the right time, given this resolution of the United Nations. More recently, the heads of state and governments adopted what is called the United Nations Pact for the Future, Global Digital Compact, and Declaration on Future Generations, with several actions. This pact allocated a central role to science, technology, and innovation. Action 28 of this pact, which focuses on science, technology, and innovation, and digital cooperation, states the following. Allow me to quote a little bit liberally from this. I quote, "We will seize the opportunities presented by science, technology, and innovation for the benefit of people and the planet. We will be guided by the principles of equity and solidarity, and promote the responsible and ethical use of science, technology, and innovation." It continues to say, "We decide to foster and promote an open, fair, and inclusive environment for scientific and technological development and cooperation worldwide, including through actively building trust in science and global collaboration on innovation. Increase the use of science, scientific knowledge, and scientific evidence in policy making, and ensure that complex global challenges are addressed through interdisciplinary collaboration, not through common sense." That's my addition. I continue to quote from this. "Encourage talent mobility and circulation, including through educational programs, and support developing countries to retain talent and prevent a brain drain while providing suitable educational and working conditions and opportunities for the workforce," unquote. There's the United Nations, the heads of state. Further, the heads of states and government committed to scale up the means of implementation to developing countries to strengthen their science, technology, and innovation capacities. The question for us, how then do we take this agenda forward here in South Africa and in the African continent in particular? Yet today, we are witnessing a resurgence of nationalistic and right-wing forces in various parts of the world, creating new barriers and threats to the vision of a more equal and inclusive world as envisaged by the United Nations. Amongst these are those who are seeking to actively support those from within our country who are still yearning for the apartheid era and seeking to undermine all interventions aimed at transforming South Africa into a truly non-racial, non-sexist, and prosperous nation with an inclusive economy. They're going all over, mainly in the United States, There are some very nice jokes on social media now about this, which I won't go into. I don't have time for that. Now, our South African context, our government has long been committed to harnessing South Africa's scientific capabilities in a manner that both addresses our national development imperatives, but also contributes to the building of a more just and equal world. It's therefore important that we ensure that the process of building and shaping our national system of innovation is founded on a sound understanding of our own historical and developmental context. Historically, the racist white minority regime used the public science system to advance its oppressive agenda of entrenching white power and excluding the black majority from opportunities, which included being this majority excluded from acquiring the necessary technical and scientific education that will empower them to engage in high-level science, technology, innovation, and commerce. One of the challenges we are facing as this government, and we are part of this effort, for instance, of ensuring production of more learners from school with maths and science. But there is still huge fear of maths and science in our country, especially in black communities. Even today, the Verwoerdian legacy. Black people can't study mathematics and science because they won't need it, because we only need them as labor. That's a reality that we've been dealing with as an MEC. Now, this resulted in, amongst other things, a distorted distribution of critical skills and knowledge, mainly along racial, class, gender, and spatial lines, and the systematic exclusion of the majority, as I have said. Now, people, when we raise this, they say, yeah, it's 30 years, though, we've had a democratic government. Yes, as I will highlight, we have made a lot of progress, but we can't really hope that the entirety of the legacy of where we come from has entirely and completely been dealt with. So that's the reality that we face. Therefore, recognizing the root causes and primary contradictions of our contemporary conjuncture is critical for the project of achieving transformative national development. Again, the Secretary General of the US, Mr. Guterres, say, I quote, "Our world becomes more unsustainable, unequal, and unpredictable. Conflicts are raging, the climate crisis is accelerating, inequalities are growing, and new technologies have unprecedented potential for good and bad." Indeed, by the way, in our own continent now, our ambassador to the AU and Ethiopia was telling me that since the establishment of the AU, the continent has never been in such a bad situation as it is now. A number of countries are outside the AU. There is another genocide taking place in Sudan. There is this war in the east of the DRC, unfortunately supported by Rwanda. And of course, its causes are multifaceted. And this is actually not taking our continent forward. That is why, therefore, I want to move to say this now. How do we then, in the light of all these challenges, build an inclusive, agile, and responsive national system of innovation? Over the last 30 years as a country, we have sought to build an NSI that is inclusive and able to unlock the capabilities of all South Africans as agents of social transformation and economic development. To do this, we have created a number of policies, which, by the way, we are free to critically reflect upon at this summit. This includes the 1996 White Paper on Science and Technology, the 1998 National Research and Technology Audit, the National Research and Technology Foresight Project done by NACI under the leadership of Dr. Swartz here, and other initiatives. In 2004, we created a standalone Department of Science and Technology. Before, it was Arts, Culture, Science and Technology. And in 2019, we produced a second white paper on science, technology and innovation, and what we now call our 10-year decadal plan, 2022 to 2032. Under the Department of Science and Technology then, which is now Department of Science, Technology and Innovation, we have also expanded the size of our national system of innovation by creating the National Advisory Council, which is hosting this gathering on innovation, the National Advisory Council on Innovation, the Association of Science of South Africa, ASAF, the Technology Innovation Agency, which is primarily aimed at funding startups. There is the chairperson who is here. The National Intellectual Property Management Office, which is another entity that we've created, and the South African National Space Agency. We're reporting in Parliament yesterday on intellectual property, raising concerns also that one of the things we have to do is to close the leakage of intellectual property, both in our country and in the African continent. I've been told, as part of my induction as Minister of Science, that South Africa is in the top 5 of the most biodiverse countries in the world. But at the same time, we've only studied 5% of our plant species in this country. We haven't studied 95%, and what is it that we can actually find there? It's the same as the continent, and a lot of our technology and IP in the continent is being stolen, literally, if we are actually going to speak the truth. Remember, at some stage, someone was wanting to patent rooibos tea in the United States. And even Bafana, by the way. So, these interventions that we have made, we believe, lay a strong basis for breaking away from the apartheid science and technology system and hopefully build one of the most capable national systems of innovation on the African continent. But we still have some weaknesses in our national system of innovation, and we are most welcome to further identify those, explain the reasons, but not stop there and say what is to be done. That's why partly we have convened this, as the chairperson of NACI and the CEO have already said. Now, one of the tasks we have is to expand science, technology, and innovation, human resources, and expansion of research capacity. I'm very pleased you haven't written human capital in my draft. I don't quite like that. I just can't even come to terms with the fact that human beings can be capital. Well, it's my own mental blockage. Premier. The 2023 STI report shows that the participation of black people and women at the highest level, for example, as professors, remains too low. Despite the increasing representation of both African and female permanent academic staff at our public universities, with their share rising from 27.82% in 2011 to 37.51% in 2020, the demographic composition of professors in our country remains unbalanced. This has not just been counting, by the way, as some people say. It's important that women are active participants, not merely as majority of society, but also women bring particular talent. My male colleagues may not like this. They can multitask, which most men can't do. While there are now more female professors, those numbers are disproportionately white. This is not an anti-white statement, it's a fact. The report also shows that while student enrollment at universities has grown, the number of academics has not proportionately increased. Unless the system expands at a higher rate than natural attrition, there will be slow growth in the intake of the next generation of black and of female academics. The proportion of staff over 60 years of age, both men and women, increased from 7.3% in 2011 to 10.4% in 2020. Not a bad thing. I'm one of those who believe that academics should not retire for as long as their mind is functional. By the way, although we've got to cater for younger intake. This trend implies that public universities will lose about 10% of permanent staff, if this is the age of our academics, with doctoral qualifications due to retirement within the next 5 years. Furthermore, the proportion of staff aged 20 to 29 declined from 7.9% in 2011 to 5.8% in 2020. This is red flags. I don't know why people use red for something bad, you know. Maybe we should say this is blue flag or something like that. Although there is an increase in the proportion of staff aged between 30 and 39, this increase is lower than that of staff aged over 60. Both good to keep academics, but also it's got this maybe unintended consequence. The percentage of staff in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics fields has remained consistent over time. That's one big threat to our national system of innovation. In 2010, the proportion of STEM staff among all staff was 51.5%, which rose slightly to 51.9% in 2021. This finding is on reflection not surprising. South African academics, once appointed on a permanent basis, cannot easily be replaced. Given that the typical academic career is around 40 years, Professor Rasigan, universities have often been compared to large tankers which change courses slowly and with difficulty. In a world now that requires agility. Now, the other matter that I want to touch on is the declining gross investment in research and development. South Africa's research and development intensity measured by gross expenditure on R&D as a percentage of our GDP stood at 0.61% in 2019, which is below the global average. A significant factor contributing to this is the decline in business research and development expenditure. Mamavuso, which dropped from minus 3.5% in 2012 to minus 10.8% in 2021. However, a notable turnaround occurred in 2021-2022 with a 26.4% increase in business R&D expenditure. That's why we are pleased business representatives are here, because we all have to engage on this. This surge was driven by public investments in key research fields, we must be clear though, including information and communications technologies, medical and health sciences, and material science. Investment in manufacturing, financial intermediation, real estate, and business services also contributed to the overall growth. While this trend indicates a positive shift in R&D investments across various economic sectors, The sustainability of these investments remains to be seen. Part of the engagement here should be about how do we sustain and grow this. Patent activity. International patent applications from South Africa declined by 40% between 2013 and 2022, potentially hindering the country's economic growth, competitiveness, and ability to attract foreign investment. Implementing policies that incentivize research and streamline patent processes can help drive innovation and increase patenting activity in our country. Another challenge is diminishing venture capital investment. Let me not go into any more detail by this, but just to do an intra-African comparison, not for purposes of mad competition. But our country's share of African venture capital deals decreased to 14% in 2022, surpassed by Nigeria's 22%, for instance. This suggests a need for increased investment and support for startups and innovation in other provinces to drive economic growth and competitiveness beyond just the Western Cape and Gauteng. Premier, we are very pleased that you're passionate about STI. Your province is doing well, it needs to do even better. But we do need to spread innovation to other provinces as well. Even most of our rural provinces, by the way. Because we need innovation in tons in the light of climate change and its implications for agriculture, which has got urban implications, by the way. Now, what are some of the structural factors in the wider political economy? South Africa's socio-economic crisis is both a cause and a result of the low investment in research, development, and innovation activities. With less money available for investment, the potential of STI to make a socio-economic contribution to the country is constrained. South Africa has a 62.6% poverty rate, a 61.5% youth unemployment rate, and a Gini coefficient of 0.66. Addressing these challenges requires fresh thinking, new approaches and innovation strategies if we are to succeed in steering the NSI out of rocky waters. It will require new forms of collaboration and sharing of scarce resources to amplify impact. And it will require greater linkages across the public and the private sectors. It will require our national system of innovation to forge linkages across the wider continent, particularly within the SADC region, the African continent, as well as within emerging alliances such as BRICS. Now, as I move towards ending, before you get bored with me, our 2019 White Paper on Science, Technology and Innovation identifies inclusivity, transformation, and partnerships as core themes, and proposes a range of actions to address policy coherence, the development of human resources, knowledge expansion, innovation, and increased investment. Our decadal plan seeks to, I quote it, address the need to develop South Africa's innovation capacity, build and transform STI human resources, strengthen and transform the research enterprise, and expand partnerships and linkages through science diplomacy, unquote. And we need tons of science diplomacy in this current world. Not just deals, but tons of science diplomacy. We view, therefore, the convening of the summit as contributing to all these United Nations commitments and our own commitments and other African. By the way, the African continent, through the AU heads of state, now in February last month, adopted a second iteration of what is known as STISA, Science, Technology and Innovation Strategy for Africa 2034. It's important also that we seek to drive that. Now, arising from this, what are our expectations from this summit? I've mentioned some of them as I was presenting this address. We say, firstly, this summit must address two fundamental questions. Some of them already mentioned by the chair. Why has the post-apartheid national system of innovation transformation not yet yielded what we want? By the way, Professor Mandaza, I'm reading a very interesting book by Eddie Maloka calling for a second republic in South Africa, saying that the first republic has exhausted itself. It's very interesting, by the way, that also Zimbabwe almost became part of a greater South Africa in the early 20th century. That was the plan, according to the Act of the Union of South Africa. The other question was, what practical steps can we take to deepen and accelerate the transformation of our national system of innovation to better serve governments, education, society, economy, and the planet? I'm talking about governance in a broader sense of governance in this country. In deliberating on the theme of the summit, I would like to urge you to critically reflect on the transformation of the NSI along a number of dimensions. I just thought I needed to say this. What are the dimensions of transformation? First, transformation and social inclusion, including people with disabilities. We are not doing as well as we should here. I'm told the statistics of people with disabilities in South Africa, I don't know how current is this, is 4 million South Africans. It's not a small number. Also, secondly, it's Africanization and indigenous knowledge in the national system of innovation. Highlighting also the role of grassroots innovation and grassroots community networks. Our philosophy as the Department of Science, Technology and Innovation is that, yes, you will have innovation from the highest level.
All right, so there you have it. That's on the left-hand side of your screen, the Science, Technology and Innovation Minister, Dr. Blade Nzimande, speaking at the inaugural summit on the transformation of national system of innovation. It's quite a mouthful, but essentially it's about government using technology as the great equalizer, as has been punted to be. The minister has really laid down what I reckon is quite an interesting theological foundation about how science is not inherently transformative, but certainly can be used to that extent. He's spoken, for example, about how the apartheid regime used state technology to advance their nefarious intentions, but how, of course, the democratic dispensation can co-opt that for much more noble intent, so to speak. He says technology can be used for the emancipation of the people. He's spoken about how he reckons what's happening in Gaza is AI facilitated, which, of course, you know, the South African government has described as a genocide. In fact, he's also spoken about how he reckons because of the impactful nature of science, academics should not retire as long as their brain works. I don't think that was an official statement he was making, by the way. He seems to have been speaking off the cuff, but I think something worth reiterating for you. The minister also mentioning there that as far as he's concerned, we need tons of science diplomacy, which is an interesting concept in and of itself, which we don't hear quite often, but one which I imagine is going to be ventilated throughout the next couple of hours.